I just have a few questions for the three up here, and then after that, any audience questions, we can go to that. And so Huey's film was Daydreams, and for that, like, there's a lot there, and that's why I really appreciate it, because it feels really personal, it feels really intimate, and it's vast in that way, and it almost, like, to me, it eschews form in the favor of just like celebrating Black life and Black folk. And so I was wondering, when, for all, just everything there, like when you were collecting and recording and documenting, were you doing that intentionally to make a project, or were you doing that just to document?
All of it was just documentary. So a lot of the footage that I have was a collection of stuff that I shot over the whole course of 2018 and some 2017. And the summer was ending, so I was like, I got all this footage, let me just cut it up and just see what I can make from it.
Yeah, and okay, I typed it out. That first statement, never focus on anything more than 5 minutes into your spirit. If you're giving it more than 5 minutes, it's too much. You gotta let it go. Give it 5 minutes, then blow it into the wind. And for me, it seems like that provides a blueprint, again, for how vast Daydreams is. But can you talk about that conversation, what it meant, but also just like what it means for the context of Daydreams?
Yes, there was actually a conversation with my neighbor / coworker who, it was like a 20-minute conversation. She just was giving so much just testimony and speaking so many prophecies about life and philosophy, and that's part of what I recorded. And I think it relates to the larger context of the film, where I would say with all that's happened around me, the film sort of acts as like this reimagination as well as like this escape, but also this re-representation of this world of Chicago and other places that I've been to. And her conversation sort of cast it as in, as I'm going throughout these travels, to never let anything burden me too much.
And there's a line that you use in your synopsis of the film, the quote unquote the magnificent and the mundane. Can you tell us what that means?
I think it's when I read the programming for the theme, it was crazy how much I saw my film fitted perfectly, because I think when I consider the magnificent and the mundane, the footage that I have of my nieces with dancing to Beyonce, I think that's like the magnificent and the mundane. Because the magnificence is, putting them in a beehive, so they already ready. But the mundane of just seeing like them growing up and just dancing and being free, and how special that moment is like 50 years from now, or 20 years from now, or 10 years from now. I'm like, hey, remember, I got this old video footage of you all dancing to Beyonce, and the way the VHS overlay sort of adds this more vintage feel to it, so it could be our own personal videos that we had in the 90s or early 2000s when we were dancing as kids.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny, like the mundane, like obviously they're in the beehive, right? That's like expected. And so Cleon, 2 parts Black, like so much of it represents the everyday, but there's a deeply felt poesis in it, and there's that poem running through the film. Can you talk about the relationship between the visual, but then that poem and where it comes from, or that piece of writing?
The poem, it came like kind of randomly. It came after the film had been done, and like there's a lot of different motifs in there, like using like flowers and whatnot. And I just asked my little sister, I was like, can you write something that, what's the relation between Blackness to the flower? So it's like, she had that line where, we come in different, scents and attire and all that, we're not a monolithic being, we're all these different things. So I just felt that was a close representation to what I felt Blackness was. It's as big as a variety of flowers, as undiscovered and whatnot,
So, I'm interested though in what informed the visual language for the film though. and how you structured it.
Yeah, that's like what was kind of a discovery thing for me, because like I usually like shoot, like that's usually what I'm into, but this was one of those projects where the actual images themselves weren't, and what was in front of them wasn't so important to me. It was more so, you know, the pacing of things and the canvas. So I guess canvas in terms of like all the different aspect ratios, it's kind of constantly going in and out of, I guess, different perspectives. And like to me, it felt like each black bar is like almost like a horse tack, like horse blinders, where I feel like that's my like experience as a black male outside my mom's home, is like I'm always like kind of looking over my shoulder, like kind of like a horse that's like kind of blinded and you can only see in like one direction, so you're constantly like kind of shifting perspectives and kind of shifting, everything's kind of windowed and uncertain, you know. And then once you go into part 2, it's just kind of full frame, edge to edge, it stays the same. And so that's like, that's the constant I feel like when I go home, you know. There's nowhere else like it. Like the rest of the world is part 1, and part 2 is like, that's what it looks like when I go home. It's like nothing's changing, nothing's, you know, moving away from you or moving away or fleeting. It's just there, and people are just smiling, you know.
And you use the word inversion or inverted bodies in your synopsis of the film. Can you talk about that and what that means? Because I mean, there's the obvious visual representation of it, but just what it means in a larger meaning.
I guess it ties in even as well. So like with part 1, that's where you're seeing bodies inverted. So that's like me kind of out in the wild, and I feel like everybody that's been in some sort of like subculture or group, I feel like can feel this. It's like a skateboarder looks at a bus bench stop where people sit on it, they'll think the complete opposite to, you know, jump on it and do whatnot. So I feel like as a black body moving through this world, it's not, you know, it's not a world created by black people, so it's like everything's a little bit different, you know. It might be okay to do this as one type of person, but it's not okay for you. So your world within this framework is inverted. Things are backwards for you, you know.
So it's like a reckoning with, I guess you could say, or just sort of like projecting out sort of what you're dealing with inside.
Exactly, yeah.
And Sarah, something that I found really interesting about your film, and I love the way you describe it, but I'm also interested by how you represent it, is someone dealing with existential anxieties, but then trying and failing to find relief in spirituality. Can you talk about how that's represented visually in the way?
Yeah, I feel like there's a very stark dichotomy between the black and white imagery and the color imagery. And so I wanted the color imagery to represent this subject's present and this existential anxiety of needing to escape the present, and then the black and white being what the escape is and what he escapes to, and it's like recollections and reminiscing, and yeah.
Can you talk about more the central figure in that film, and just like your framing, and just more, I'm really interested in the way it was shot. Can you just say more about that?
Well, I can talk about the intro specifically because I wanted it to feel like you're almost uncomfortable watching this character. It's like you're a voyeur, and you're really looking into his soul, for lack of a better word, because of the way he like looks onto the screen with like so much pain, to me at least. So, sorry, I forgot your question.
I'm also just interested in how it was shot.
Yeah. I shot it on a film camera, an SR2, Arri SR2, and I mostly did it on my own. I was manning the camera, and I had somebody dolling me in and a couple of people on lights, but it was like a really small crew. And I decided to shoot it that way because shooting on film, one is a privilege that I can access. I put away some funds for that, and two, it really forces me to think about what I'm shooting, and I don't have like throwaway takes. So being confined into okay, I'm going to shoot this, and I have to shoot it now, and that's it. It really helps me in the process. Did I answer your question?
Yeah. No, definitely. And actually, I really appreciate you talking about voyeurism, just because, Huey, back to your film, because it seems so personal and intimate, I wonder what it was like for you to watch it with a lot of people. I know that you had a screening recently in Chicago of it, which was like the first screening. I'm sorry I missed it, by the way.
No, this is like the largest audience to ever see it right here. So,
but what was it like? Because I felt like I was looking at you, and there was a moment where you were not looking at the screen. It seemed like I could have just been reading into that. But I feel like if this was my recordings or documentation, it would feel awkward or personal.
It does. It feels so embarrassing. Especially the scene when the guy is singing, and then you see the coconut oil, and then the liquor bottle, and then the grinder. So it's just, the symbolism within that. So it's like, oh my God, I don't. But it feels very personal, just showing it. But at the same time, I think the intimacy of it makes it relatable.
Do folks have questions?
None? Folks want my IG?
I am T. Huey.
I appreciate the film, especially like the Black Part 2, or forgive me for messing up the title. I loved a particular shot that you did where juxtapose two, not really, but you put two shots in two different places. One where a group of friends, you cut off their heads, and it was the top part, just the top part. And then we came to the part 2, it was a full part. And I was telegraphing and hope you got to where I wanted you to land, where the lady was out of focus, and it was very timely that you rack focus to see her, because I'm like, women are now, Black women especially, are being seen, right? Literally on film and in community, right? So I really do appreciate you giving a shout out. I'm hoping you meant that.
Definitely.
But
no,
I felt
thank
it,
you.
so thank you.
Yeah, no, first generation, so all my parents, at least within my family structure, all the women, like the matriarchs, they bring home all the bread, they pay all the bills, like they all kill the game. So it's just like what my reality is. It's the men usually have it's like the men have the bachelors while the women have the masters, in my family. So actually, literally, yeah.
I wonder, for the films that we saw just now, if they're indicative of how y'all approach film, video, cinema in your practices, or whether they're very specific personal manifestations of something that you want to say in a moment.
I think for me it was really personal. I had never approached a project like that the way I did, and I think because I have a magazine journalism background, that was what I studied in my bachelor's. All of my video work was extremely structured, and it was like portraits or documentation, and purely for the sake of somebody else. But this piece felt kind of like what it feels like to wake up and not quite remember that dream that you really want to remember. I wanted to make something that felt like that to me. So.
Yeah, I really feel you when you say you're putting out something that's super personal. With 2 parts, all the second part was filmed in one day, so that was just me going back to just holidays with the family and whatnot. And it wasn't until I finished editing that part that I realized that there's a whole nother aspect of life that doesn't look or feel like this, at least what's realistically around me. But I didn't plan to show anybody this film. I thought it was something that it was gonna be 10 years from now, and we're all talking shit, oh, I remember you looking you came with the camera and we're shooting something. So it's there was a transformation throughout the process that it became something that was more than just me looking at my family, but like it became like me looking at myself. So,
yeah. For me, it's part of it is something you like externalize as an artist. Like, okay, now I got this out of me. But as I was approaching this film, it was very much, I was inspired by Random Acts of Flyness too, and Kahlil Joseph. So it was like I had all these pieces that I wanted to collage together. Because I'm also a music maker, and a lot of my music process is collaging. So I try to do that with a visual collage and just piece stuff together. And I would say, out of all the projects that I've done, this is the one where I really took a close look at the world around me and connected to my family and life and culture and Black life and Black traditions. Whereas a lot of my other film work is very, very specific on what I focus on. What this was just very much more worldly and communal, but at the same time very personal and intimate.
But to that point, I'm interested in what I guess like maybe archival work, what role that plays in the work that you make in general. Just because this is like I think to me it's a very like it's just so I'm just like very impressed by like how much is in there, because I think and this relates to a lot of conversations I have with people, especially Black folks who are artists or filmmakers or scholars, but you know, just like the importance of that, you know, and so why I found Daydreams very interesting, like I said, was not necessarily form, it was the vastness of it, and I think that that's politically important and that's personally important. So I guess just to that, because I am so impressed about the vastness of it, what place does maybe even like a broader archive, one that's not personal, have to you as someone that makes different kinds of artistic work?
Thank you. I would say it gave me the chance to sort of present the world that I see and the Chicago that I know and the scene with the people dancing, all the old people. That's my block at home. So every year we have this block party. So it's as if that I'm lucky to get all these particular moments that I see and just piece them together. And overall, I would say that as it relates to my archives, I think when I look back 10 years from now, I'll be proud even more to know that I captured all these particular moments for this particular visual. And as you mentioned, the vastness of it, it's so crazy because within the vastness, I see it just being this overarching thread too that weaves it all together of Black life and then the mundaneness of just what is beauty. But I think your question about like what is mundane to like Black life is so important, and I feel like that's what my film sort of explores. That's why I'm so glad you chose it, because it's perfectly fit.
I agree. One last call for questions. Okay, we have over here.
Mine isn't a question, it's just the observation involved in the films. But I think that the thing that came through the most for me watching all of them was ancestral memories and reminders coming through, which I don't get to experience much watching non-Black people make film. And so it really was almost like a transcendent experience for me, because all these like memories came through and all these different ancestral visuals were really present, because all of your stories were so personal. So that was really beautiful. I just wanted to comment on that.
Thank you so much.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So against like the backdrop of like spectacular representations of Black life, right? I'm very curious, kind of why is it important for you all? So each artist, why is it important for you all to engage with the mundane, the everyday, the ordinary, the personal, the archival? Like, what is your stake in these frames of references? And this is kind of building on the last two observations and Janelle's last comment, but I'm really fascinated in this climate kind of where black images are kind of circulating within this kind of frame? Why is the mundane, the everyday, the personal important to you?
At least for me, I think this was like an experiment in speaking directly to black people. I think a lot of times I've looked at film as trying to speak to everybody, but it's been more clear to me that it's more, my job is probably to speak to a specific set of people, you know, and it's not necessarily people of color. I'm speaking to everybody, but it's black people is who I'm trying to put my framework in. I think the general world needs to be able to attach their subject position to our mundaneities and understand that they're the same as their own, you know, or they have their own, you know, their own dynamic within it. But I don't think enough people speak to us. I think straight white males get spoken to a lot. I don't think women get spoken to. I don't think Chicanos or natives get spoken to. So I think in general, this is a cool time because I see so many different people making films and they're speaking to themselves and like trying to find self in that.
I think the media, especially news particularly, is saturated, heavily saturated with sensational stories and narratives surrounding black people specifically. And I mean, with everything that's going on with police brutality, that's been going on. I think it is important, but I think it's also extremely important that there's stories out there that have nothing to do with that. Where people like me can look at the screen and be like, that's me, you know what I mean? Like, that's really important to me, so.
Yes, and to all of your answers. For me, what I've come to understand, the politics of representation and how important it is to see yourself and represent yourself on camera. And I always learn from theater, you can't be what you cannot see. So important it is that we create the images we want to see for ourselves. We the ones we've been waiting for. And I realize how when you do have the camera in your hand, it is this sort of reclamation of your identity, this reclamation of your representation, this reclamation of yourself and your community and your family. And I take that power as something powerful and a gift to be able to use it as a way to reclaim ourselves in our struggle for liberation.
Thank you for that. I think maybe we have time for one more short question. Yes, and this is only like part 1 through 3. It's like a part 1 through 5. And I encourage like everybody to do their own version. Just take the little mundane moments that you see from going to the bus, singing in the shower, and just piece those little pieces together and you'll see this thread come out of it and it'll speak for itself. And you can have a conversation with that art piece. But I definitely would love to do like a little Daydreams LA version while I'm here, just to continue to add to the different Daydream films that I have. And also, I think of Daydreams as both being like this directly me being present, but this conscious reimagination of what I'm seeing around me. But thank you. Thank you, everyone, for coming. A really big thanks to all the filmmakers for their work and for their thoughtful answers during this conversation. Thank you all again for coming.
Thank you.